actually said that multiple times. Just way too much work. I'm not willing to start over. And then we'd have to split up our like movie collection, which would just be way too much. So,
Yeah.
so I'm safe. All right, good morning. I only get to say good morning to you a few more times, starting to make me sad. Starting to get sentimental or sad. Already, right? Well, so we have today, and then we have Monday, and then Wednesday's our final. So today and Monday, I get to say good morning to you, and then I'll just record like 50 good mornings and post them on Canvas. Yeah.
On the syllabus, it said that final week was to be announced.
Yeah.
Anything that week?
So we were supposed to have a final that week, but I have been selected by my elementary school kids teacher to help with cookie decorating that day. And so I'm so sorry, but that takes priority.
It's not in your playtime this evening.
Yeah, yeah. There aren't very many opportunities to go to a classroom and decorate cookies. I mean, I'm not going to eat them because it's slightly terrifying. Like 50 little like fourth grade students decorating them. I'm not going to eat them, but I'll help decorate them and then maybe eat one at home. But so what we'll do is our final will be on Wednesday. And then during that week, I'll be here that whole week, except for the day that I think we were scheduled. So that will be the day of our final. Will be on Wednesday. So on the plus side, you're done a little bit early. Hopefully that gives you some extra time to focus on your other finals. On the downside, it's one less day that I get to say good morning to you. So that's a little sad, but I will be decorating cookies. I'll think of you as I'm covered in sprinkles and frosting. Right? It's always an interesting mess, but I'm grateful I get to go. I had a couple other thoughts. So what we'll do today is we will finish up with this. We have one slide left, and then I have a video I want to show you about some of the research that's being done in terms of trying to find cures for some of these things that we've been talking about in this chapter. And then we'll move on to chapter 18, which are our last set of slides. We'll look at forensic psychology and some famous cases of not guilty by reason of insanity individuals. If you're into serial killers, you might be excited about that today, something to look forward to. So we'll kind of wrap all this up. I want to encourage you to start preparing for the final. It's not cumulative at all. It's just on this last unit. So it's just a third exam. Okay, but it will open on Canvas on Wednesday and then close Wednesday night. So just like the other ones that you've taken in here, same style, same format. There's a study guide on Canvas and everything. I'd also like to encourage you to check your grades on Canvas. I'm just trying to remember to say this to all my classes this week. If anything seems wrong or out of place or missing that shouldn't be, please let me know. And that way I can try and look into it with you while it's still easy to change. Once I submit final grades, it's a much more complicated. Okay. Are there any questions about any of the remaining stuff that we have? I can't believe that we're like this far into the semester. Like it feels like it went really fast, yet August feels like a really long time ago at this point, in my mind anyway. Okay. Any questions, anything about any of that at all? All right, so we talked about a bunch of different types of dementia, and then we kind of ended talking about treatment and early intervention. So I want to talk about this, and then I'll close with that video that I just mentioned a moment ago. There's a lot that you can do to prevent or delay things like Alzheimer's dementias. So if you are destined to, can't necessarily things to take care of yourself, it actually goes a long way. We've learned so much over the last like 10 years about things that you can do that really promote like brain health, right? And unfortunately, they're kind of the things that we all know we're supposed to do anyway, but they become more and more important the older that we get. So things like exercise, right? Exercising increases like blood flow and oxygen within your body, within your brain, really important for overall health. But diet is probably the biggest one up here. So we have, I read an article literally, I think it was last week, that was talking about some recent like meta-analysis studies that have been done, looking at like multiple studies over time of how diet is thought to reduce your likelihood of these things by about 30%. Right. So, I mean, just a staggering amount that diet plays a huge role. So, doing things like following more of like a Mediterranean diet, where you avoid a lot of like trans fats and saturated fats, things that are really bad for you, a lot of like very like sugary like foods. The one who loves cake up here telling you to avoid sugary foods, I know. And it's okay to eat those things, but trying to eat a little bit like more across the rainbow, eating smaller meals rather than bigger ones. Things like green tea, right? There's a bunch of like diet related research that we're starting to notice. And diet is thought to play an increasingly bigger role in things like Alzheimer's and dementias. And so what we're even seeing when it comes to treatments is some of the newer like treatments and research things are focusing on insulin, right? Almost looking at what they're calling like a type 3 diabetes. So there's a lot of like research on this, and we'll see what the future leads with it. But trying to eat a little bit better, to exercise. The other one that's really big here is mental stimulation, which you're doing. If you're here and you're in school and you're reading and you're mentally active, that plays a big role as well. And it's interesting. I was reading something else the other day. It was talking about following the road less traveled. We tend to be creatures of habit, like down to where we sit. Like a lot of you sat in the same spots all semester. Don't change it now; that'd be weird, right? But try to take a different path sometime today or next week. Like I walk the same way to my office, the same way to like everywhere. I drive the same path to work every day. Take a different one, right? You form new pathways in your brain. Instead of me walking left when I get out of here, I'm going to walk right today. It's like, it's longer, so I never go that way, but it's stuff like that, right? Like pushing your brain to form new pathways, take the road less traveled, play strategy games and puzzles and riddles and little mental games. My kids are helping me with this. Like yesterday, my daughter was like, let's do the countries in Africa. I was like, sure. I got 2. I was like, that's shameful. My daughter got like 98% and I got 2%. She's all like, you need to study. I know, right? But doing like little brain games like that, right? Like math games to help keep your brain like sharp. The more you keep your brain active, the more it stays active, right? Getting good sleep. This is another one that we're seeing playing a really big role. Sometimes people don't get enough sleep. It leads to a lot of brain fog and exhaustion, which can only add to your likelihood of getting things like Alzheimer's and dementia when you're older. Managing your stress, having a good social life, being active with other people, engaging and interacting with other people. Of all the things up here, diet is really thought to be the biggest one. But if you do all of these things, you can drastically delay, right, the onset of these different dementias. My partner's grandma lived to 99, I think it was. Mine lived to 104, like I said, but 99 for my partner's grandma. And she was like super sharp all the way through, really took good care of herself. If you can do these things, it really does make a big difference, right? And hopefully by the time most of us get into like our 60s and 70s and 80s, we have some better treatments and cures and things in place. As I said, I found a video, and it's maybe I think like 6 years old, but it was looking at a cool like new research study that's being done, trying to do like a nasal spray as a way to reduce some of the plaques and tangles that build up with this disorder. So I want to play that for you, and then I'll see if there are any other comments or questions before we move on. But I think it's kind of a encourage immune system in a way to target these plaques and buildups that we have. So a lot of things being done between looking at like blood sugar and insulin, things related to diet, looking at trying to use the immune system. There's a lot of trials. So hopefully as we continue to progress, we'll actually get a good like treatment or cure, ideally at some point, because again, these things do affect a lot of people, 1 in 10 people. So a lot of research definitely being dedicated to it. And as I mentioned, that is in trials right now. So fingers crossed, maybe it'll be really helpful. There were a couple of drugs within the last year that have been shown to be quite helpful through research. So hopefully we're getting a little bit closer. So any like last like thoughts or comments or stories or anything related to this chapter? Anything related to the Alzheimer's or like dementias or anything? Yeah.
I moved home from Northern California in 2010, and I could tell there was something wrong with my dad.
Sure.
My mom was in denial. But he was a landscape contractor, and the things he didn't know that I knew he knew. And he was like making a lot of mistakes, like leaving hoses on and flooding out the area.
Yeah.
And he was just cognitive impairment. Like, we had a neurologist, but for years he didn't get diagnosed now until last year.
Mm-hmm.
Why did we start driving? Because until they're diagnosed, DOB won't take it away.
Right.
But it was interesting because my son with schizoaffective now, psychosis can cause cognitive impairment. And so as Quinn was getting sick and my dad was getting, struggling more and more, they kind of met in the middle. And they like have so much just empathy and patience for each other. They don't really talk about it, they just know.
Yeah.
So sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's horrible to watch, and it's
sure. But trying to find the good in it and the sweet in it when you can, yeah. And sometimes it's all you can do. Yeah. Yeah.
And he is so healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really take care of himself, so I'll be around probably longer for those starts slowing down to the point where he's gonna die. It's interesting.
Yeah. And again, sometimes all we can do is try to find the best in it, right? In a difficult situation, and how well you take care of yourself really has a big impact on how long you can like go through this process and how quickly it accelerates and so on. Those are really important factors that we're just seeing more and more as we understand the disorder more. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing just in general how much diet tends to play a role in overall health. So all of the things that are really like processed foods, high like sugar foods and the trans fats and like all of the things that we generally know aren't the best for us, like they just have a very strong like negative correlation with like health, right? And too much like screen time we're seeing is also affecting like brain health and like cognitive development. So they negatively impact our overall health by causing things like obesity, right? They cause more like buildup of plaques in the heart, which reduces blood flow and oxygenation. Like there's just like a whole huge list of how they slowly tend to have like almost like a corrosive effect on our health, right? Which is, hard, but like, that's why we, so many people preach like diet and health. It does have so many far reaching like implications. It's kind of intense to read, right? And it's something that in theory should be so easy to change, but it isn't always. So
Alzheimer's more common in America because American diet is
yeah.
a little.
It is more common here than it is in other countries. That's a big part of like how we were able to discover some of the diet related things is looking at changes. Different cultures have different habits with like their meals and like with, having tea and like less stress. And like, so you do see some cultural components to it as well. Yeah, very. Forget where we were. We were on a cruise, like we were in Brazil. No, Belize. Yeah, they kept saying it was unbelievable. That's what helped me remember. Like, you won't believe it. Like every 2 seconds, it was like, it's unbelievable. But they were talking about like this plant that they had discovered there that was helping with cancer and with Alzheimer's and all these things. And it hadn't gone through any kind of like research or trials yet. But, who knows what we'll discover. I mean, the different cultures are just have a different emphasis on different things that is so valuable. Yeah, Jake.
I was gonna say, like, I actually like learned a lot about like Alzheimer's from this documentary I watched a few years ago that followed the journey of somebody through the disease. I think it's called like Ben and Barbara or something.
Okay.
I think that's the name of the documentary, but it was definitely really interesting, and I learned like a lot of the Alzheimer's from that, and I
Yeah.
don't know much about.
Awesome, right, I'll have to look it up. Thank you. Last set of slides, you ready for this? Right, chapter 16, forensic psychology. Yeah. Anyone in here interested in forensic psychology, like considering it maybe as like a career? A couple of you, right? Not that you have to, I'm not gonna hold you to it, right? But last set of slides, we'll look a little bit at psychology and the law, right? How the law and psychology interact with each other. I think kind of interesting if you're into serial killers, we'll be looking at a few of them today, which is kind of interesting and fun, frightening, but interesting. So many great documentaries in the last couple of years on serial killers. But this whole chapter is about forensic psychology, right? The intersections between psychological practice and research and the law or the judicial system. And there's kind of two sides to the coin of this. And we'll look at the first one today and then this one next time. There's how psychology affects the law and how the law affects psychology. And both of them are, interesting and kind of equally important. So what we'll look at today is how does psychology and like mental illness and mental health affect the legal system and verdicts and trials. And then what we'll look at next time is more of how the law affects people who practice psychology in terms of like ethics and moral guidelines and things along those lines. So when we're looking at how psychology affects the law, the idea here is that we're looking at like if somebody commits a crime and they go to trial or they're maybe facing legal charges, if they have a psychological disorder, is that enough to maybe treat them or try them a little bit differently? Should it affect their legal proceedings? And so we're going to look at some of the ways that mental illness or like mental state, things like insanity, might affect somebody's legal proceedings. And I am by no means a lawyer or like trained in law, so we'll just approach this from the psychological side. And this can get very complicated and very like case by case basis, but super interesting. I love this too. Mr. Evans is speaking to plea insanity. Insanity isn't something you can use for everything, but it is something that comes up a fair amount. And we're looking at this process that we call criminal commitment. Right? When somebody is accused of a crime or has committed a crime, should they receive treatment and go to like a psychiatric facility, or should they go to jail, or should they be found not guilty? There's a couple of different verdicts and kind of like different ways that this could play out. And that's what we'll talk about for a little bit here. Probably the one you've heard of the most is a verdict called not guilty by reason of insanity. This is the most commonly discussed one, but it's actually granted very, very rarely. It's like less than 1% of the time that people plead this are they actually given this verdict. So the idea here is you are found not guilty of whatever crime you committed because you were insane at the time of the crime that was committed. Now, insanity is not a mental illness. It's a legal term. And the definition can vary from state to state and place to place, but the general definition of insanity is at the time of committing a crime. So when you commit the actual crime, because of a mental disorder or a mental illness, a person did not know right from wrong or could not resist an uncontrollable impulse to act. So when you commit a crime, if you have a mental illness that made it where you didn't know right from wrong, you didn't know what you were doing, or you had an impulse that you couldn't control or stop, you might qualify for a verdict or a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, the tricky thing about this is a lot of people have tried to fake it and not gotten away with it. The criteria for being found insane or like having insanity is really, really intense. You're evaluated by multiple psychologists and psychiatrists. You take quite a few different batteries or instruments of tests. It's not an easy verdict to get. Typically, people who have it or who are granted this verdict have a history of like hospitalization. Schizophrenia is really common, maybe abuse or psychosis. It's not, again, very commonly granted. And we'll see a couple of cases where people got this, but this is the one we hear of most, but it's not very, very common. And the biggest criticism here is if somebody's found not guilty by reason of insanity, they don't go to jail. they don't go home and like get off like free. They typically will go to a mental hospital where they might be for like months or years or even the rest of their life. But a lot of people say it's not fair, right? Like, how do we decide like what mental illnesses dictate this or don't? How do we know if someone was truly insane? Again, it's not easy to get because there are so many steps to try and prove this. But it's usually in cases where it's really obvious that someone is not in touch with reality. I committed a crime because the voices told me to do it, right? I was hallucinating and didn't know what I was looking at, right? And didn't know what was happening, right? Or maybe somebody who has a really low level of intelligence who didn't understand what they were doing. Like if Arnie were like, didn't understand what he was doing with the grasshopper, right? Like he didn't understand life and death. So not commonly granted, but definitely something we hear about a lot. Yeah.
I think that happens in Mice and Men.
Yeah.
At least like a scenario like that happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, with money.
Right. Right. He kills somebody.
Yeah, he killed somebody and because he's like scared.
Uh-huh.
He doesn't realize.
Right. Really low level of intelligence, doesn't understand what he's doing. Right. I mean, it never like goes to like trial or anything like that. Right. But if it had, right, you could have argued that he couldn't appreciate the gravity of his actions.
Yeah.
So again, commonly heard of, but not commonly granted. These ones are actually really common, but we don't hear about it a lot. People can be found guilty, but mentally ill. Okay, you are guilty of the crime that you committed, but yes, you have a mental illness. It's just not enough for us to treat you differently. And so if someone's found guilty, but mentally ill, they go to jail, right? But they receive mental health treatment while in jail, which you can receive anyway. Right, but this person would be found guilty, so they get, punished for their crime, go to jail, but receive treatment. Very, very common. Also guilty with a diminished capacity. So let's say that you have a mental illness, but it's not enough for us to say you should be found not guilty. So with this one, we find you guilty, but we take into consideration that you have a mental illness. So maybe if you committed murder, instead of being found guilty of like first-degree murder, you're found guilty of manslaughter. So you receive a lesser sentence because you're guilty, but you did have a mental illness that we want to consider. But that one's actually really, really common. Both of these happen all the time. They're just not as dramatic, so we don't hear about them as much. All of these first three have to do with the time of when you committed the crime. But sometimes people have something happen as a result of the crime, or maybe even after, that changes how well they're functioning now. And so another thing that we can sometimes see is that someone can be found incompetent to stand trial. So let's say somebody committed a crime and they kind of snap or have a psychotic break as a result, or maybe their mental health declines rapidly as a result of what happened. We can find them mentally incompetent to stand trial, in which case they can't defend themselves. They don't understand the charges being brought against them. So with this one, people will typically go to a mental hospital until they are competent to stand trial. Maybe it's a matter of getting on medication or adjusting medication or getting themselves under control. They might spend the rest of their life and never hit competence. But typically this individual will go to a psychiatric hospital until they're healthy enough or with it enough to understand what's going on. And then they go through the legal proceedings like normal. With all of these, though, we're taking into account somebody's mental health and if it should affect the verdict that they have. There have been lots of cases of people who have had one of these verdicts as part of their trial. There's even more than I have up here, but I have some of the bigger ones. So let's look at some of these famous people. This is a slightly frightening slide of people to be standing close to, right? And there are a lot of frightening people who aren't up here, but let's look at some of these people for just a moment. I'm going to give you like a little introduction to these people, and then I'm going to have you get into groups, and you're going to spend a little bit of time researching one of them or one pair of them for your last participation exercise. Okay, so let me just give you a little snippet and be thinking in your mind who you would like to spend more time looking into. Have like a backup or two just in case somebody else had the same thought. But lots of folks up here. So starting with the top left, right? Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates, famous for her postpartum psychosis. She drowned her 5 children in the bathtub because they weren't developing correctly in her mind. Jeffrey Dahmer, a very famous serial killer, killed 15 to 17 young men, cut his victims into pieces. One of them almost got away. Ed Gein, the Wisconsin grave robber. Ed Gein would remove the skin and sew body parts together as trophies and furniture of his victims from Wisconsin. He looks so shocked, right? Say it so casually. Just some trophies and clothing, right? John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer. Gacy would dress up as a clown and go to birthday parties. He committed multiple acts of sodomy and murder, 30 plus young boys that he killed and buried in the crawl space beneath his house. John Hinckley Jr., up on the top right, tried to assassinate President Reagan to impress actress Jodie Foster, wrote her a whole letter trying to get her attention, tried to assassinate him for her. David Berkowitz. Berkowitz was the son of Sam killer in New York who killed 6 victims and wounded several others in multiple shooting attacks. Kenneth Bianchi is the hillside strangler that kidnapped and sexually assaulted quite a few women. Francine Hughes, down at the bottom, set her husband on fire while he was sleeping. These two, Anissa Weyer and Morgan Geyser, kind of one of the newer cases, 2 12-year-old girls who stabbed another girl 19 times in the forest in an attempt to impress a fictional character called Slender Man that they found or heard of on Creepypasta, the Creepypasta website. Mark David Chapman assassinated John Lennon and then sat there reading the book The Catcher in the Rye at the crime scene while he waited to be caught. Lorena Bobbitt, famous for cutting her husband's penis off and then throwing it out a car window into the forest. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who sent quite a few packages in the mail and bombs across the nation. And then James Holmes, the Colorado Joker killer, who he shot quite a few people in a movie theater, 20 people in a movie theater, killing 12 of them, calling himself the Joker. I went to that movie theater 3 days before he did that, which was so crazy to me, right? I always think about that when I talk about him. It's closed now. They never reopened it. 3 days before he did that, I saw a movie in that theater in Colorado, which was crazy. And last semester, I had a student whose mom had a picture of Gacy, came to her birthday party dressed as a clown as a child and had a picture of it. So wild, right? Small world, I guess, right? But these are some of the folks that have had not guilty or insanity in some way as part of their trials. Somebody mentioned another one to me, but I don't know much about it. The Trenton Chase, the Sacramento vampire killer. I don't know much about him. I'll have to look that up. But these are a group of individuals that you're going to spend a little bit of time with. So what I want you to do is I want you to get into groups of like 4 or 5 people, whatever's convenient around you. Don't make it smaller than 4. It puts too much responsibility on you. It can be a little bigger if it needs to be, but like 4, let's say 4 to 6 people. And I want you to come up with like your top choice and then who your backup is. As soon as you have somebody that you know you want, raise your hand and I'll come around and I'll give you a worksheet and then I'll tell you what we're going to do from there. But find like 4 to 6 people. Who do you want to spend some more time looking into? And let me know when you know who you want.
Is there anything?
Yeah. Those are another cloud. Alright.
Is everyone else already, Josh, I had already taken? They reference, the Orion, how you collect.
Totally.
Plus that.
And then.
All right, look up to the background. Look up.
Does everybody have something? Does everybody? No.
These two right in the middle, right? Really like, again, another case, but somebody grabbed them, so that's perfect. So what I'm gonna let you do, we have about 30 minutes left for our time today. And I'm gonna give that time to you to work with your group. So this shouldn't be anything that you need to worry about outside of class today. Okay, you don't need anything else on your plate at the moment, right? I know we're all in that spot. So what I want you to do as a group is to do a little research on your person or persons, right? Find out a little bit about their background. What crimes did they commit? And then their legal proceedings. Where are they now? If there's anything random or interesting that might be fun to point out. So as a group, maybe take notes on this or divide it up. Next class, I'm gonna have you present on your person or persons just from your seat. You don't have to come up here and do that. And you can decide as a group how you want to split this up. Like if one person wants to do all the talking, that's fine. If you each want to do a little bit, that's fine. So there's no pressure for you, any of you or all of you to talk, just whoever is comfortable. So I'll give you the last like half hour. That should be plenty of time to answer all that, get some notes down. If you finish before the time's up, you're welcome to go, but please make use of it, Don. That way you don't have any homework. And next class, what I'll do is I'll give you like 5 minutes to touch base with your group, and then we'll just go through and we'll talk about each one and then move forward. Okay, and I'm gonna wander around if you have questions or need help, but go ahead, take the time and let me know if you have any questions. Oh, and I crossed it out on your sheet. Sorry, last thing, and then I'll be quiet. You don't need to do a visual aid of any kind. Sometimes I have people do that. You just need to refer.